State of Belief Radio is a production of Interfaith Alliance. I'm Welton Gaddy. If you're a student of American politics in the 21st century, there are only a few authors, very few authors, who can truly help make sense of much of what's going on. And for anyone trying to understand some of the most seemingly irrational behavior on the part of voters, as well as the reason some messages seem to resonate so much more easily than others, there is no substitute for George Lakoff. In his books, which include Don't Think of an Elephant, Moral Politics, and the Political Mind, Professor Lakoff makes a compelling argument for understanding roles learned early in childhood, thematic frames. The New York Times Magazine has called George the father of framing, and the crucial place of effective communication in government and in society. George conveys sophisticated neurological and linguistic theory in language that a layman can grasp. I got it. And he writes frequently for the Huffington Post and other publications. George Lakoff is professor of linguistics at the University of California, Berkeley, and I'm very pleased to welcome him to State of Belief Radio.
What a pleasure to be here.
Thanks, George, so much. It's been a long time since we were together. You've worked with Interfaith Alliance before, and we appreciate you doing this today. While some of the Tea Party candidates, even losing ones, seemed to seize the spotlight right after the election, President Obama seemed to be on the defensive and apologetic for not communicating well enough with voters. What happened to candidate Obama and his ability to connect?
Well, what happened the day after the election. They hired Rahm Emanuel as chief of staff. What that meant and what it meant for the way the administration was put together was that there was a commitment to three things: making deals, twisting arms whenever possible, and giving up on moral leadership, and instead assuming that all government was practical and a matter of policy, and forgetting what Obama had said in the election and that got him elected, namely moral leadership. When Obama was asked by Anderson Cooper during the election what he saw as patriotism, Obama answered correctly. He said, patriotism begins with people caring about each other. That's why we have principles like freedom and fairness for everybody, not just for the powerful. During the election, he pointed out all of the moral reasons, starting with empathy, that he had the positions he had. However, there is a problem that both Obama has and that the Democrats in general have. They have not understood how the brain and mind work. And Republicans have, for an interesting reason. Many Republicans, when they went to college, studied business, and with it, marketing. And professors of marketing understand how the brain works. They study cognitive science. But if you go to college like Democrats do and study political science and economics and public policy, you don't learn anything about how the brain works. You don't learn cognitive science or neuroscience. What you learn is a theory of reason that goes back to 1650, to Descartes, that says all thought is conscious, that it's based on self-interest, that it's logical, that you can think directly about the world, that it's all literal, and therefore, if you just tell people the truth, they'll reason to the right conclusion. That's simply not true. Every part of it turns out to be false from the study of the brain. Now, the effect of that is important. All politics is moral. What we have found in studying conceptual systems in politics is that, think about it this way. Every political leader gets up and says, here's what I think we should do because it's right. Nobody gets up and says, here's what we should do because it's wrong. It's evil, do what I say. People don't say that. The problem is that different political leaders have different moral systems, different understandings of what's right. Mm-hmm. And conservatives understand their moral system very well progressives don't understand theirs. They think that everything is a matter of policy, and they just talk policy, which goes right by people and doesn't activate their moral sense, which is how they define who they are in their deepest sense.
George, relate that theory to what you said in the opening question about Rahm Emanuel and President Obama and the ability to connect.
Rahm Emanuel never understood any of this at all. Mm-hmm. And communications in the White House went from the White House inner circle to communications people and not back. I mean, there wasn't really any understanding about, that communication was based on unconscious thought, on metaphor, on framing, and so on. Framing is not just messaging. It's not spin. It's the normal way we think. We all think in terms of frames. If I mention a surgeon, you will think that there is somebody he's operating on in an operating room. You'll get an entire cognitive structure from the single word. Mm-hmm. Now, if I mention Tea Party, you'll get Boston Tea Party, patriotism, freedom, liberty, and all of those things from Tea Party. Mm-hmm. Right? The Democrats don't understand how language works. And the conservatives have been using their version of freedom and their version of patriotism rather than the one that comes from the progressives. Progressives have no idea how to use language to evoke their beliefs, what they really believe, and the truth. You cannot tell the truth to someone and have them understand it if it doesn't fit the way they understand the world.
George, you've been writing about this now for a long, long time. You've observed the inability of progressives in particular to communicate a message successfully, a message that in theory should really have overwhelming support. I don't see it getting any better, is it?
It's not.
Why?
It is not getting better.
Why?
Because of institutions in Washington. If you look at the schedule of any congressman or senator, it would swamp you. Those people work very hard. They're going all day, every day. They don't have time to read all these books and think things through like that. They're working on policy constantly, working on deals. They're working on strategy. The political strategists they have tend to come from basically PR agencies. That is, PR firms mm-hmm. that sell advertising and so on. Mm-hmm. Advertising agencies make their money taking 15% usually of any advertising. They include people who do campaign strategy. Now, if you are in such an agency, you might say, well, how many agencies are there in Washington? There might be hundreds of Democrats in Washington in Congress and the Senate, but there are only like a couple of dozen agencies. Mm-hmm. That means that if you won, you want your agency, your team, to do what they did before. If you lost, you're not there, so you don't have any control over it. Mm-hmm. The result is that the agencies keep doing what they did before, and that the same pollsters year after year, keep doing what they did before, not knowing how language works and not knowing the effects on voters.
My guest is George Lakoff, professor of linguistics at the University of California, Berkeley, author of numerous books, including Don't Think of an Elephant